So again, hopefully everything up to this point has been review, and hopefully these next few slides are also a review. And this is just to find the inverse of a function. So when we know a function has an inverse, the way that we find the inverse is to simply, if we're graphing it, you can just reflect it over the line y equals x. But algebraically, I'm going to replace x with y and y with x, and then I'm going to solve the equation for y. So it's pretty straightforward. Here I had, remember, f of x is the same as y, so I have y equals 3x minus 2. I replace it, x equals 3y minus 2. And then it's just algebra solving for y. So add 2 to each side, divide by 3 on each side. So this could be an answer, or I could have y equals x over 3 plus 2/3. Whichever way you write it is just fine. So here's your basic guidelines for finding an inverse. A, make sure there is an inverse. B, make sure your function has y isolated. C, replace x with y, y with x, and then solve. And then of course you can look at the domain and the range and to verify and all of that, but really I just do the first 3 steps and then, pray I did it right. So here, find the inverse. F of x equals 3x plus 1, square root of that function. So again, I can know that this is actually a y equals, and so when I rewrite it, I'm going to call this x, I'm going to call this y, and whether or not you call it y inverse, it doesn't matter. At the end, you probably should write it like this, where you have y inverse or f inverse of x. Wow. F inverse of x equals, and then find your inverse function. But most of this is just algebra. So here, obviously, I'm going to have to square each side in order to get rid of the square root. That gives me x squared equals 3 y inverse plus 1. I'm going to subtract 1 from each side. I'm going to divide by 3 on each side. And so again, I can write my answer like this, or I could break it down and say f inverse is x squared over 3 minus 1 over 3. All of the above correct. Here's one for you to try. I have a cubic function here. Go ahead and find the inverse, and then when you're done, press play to see how you did. So if you forget to check to make sure there's an inverse, and you just get started on the problem, then it's not a bad idea if you get to something that might get a little bit sticky and you're like, ugh, this doesn't look very good. Make sure that you double check, is there in fact an inverse to this function? So here, as you can see, I started my first step, I replaced x with y, y with x. Then I tried to get y by itself, and even if on this side I would have taken a y out of both terms, I still would have had a y over here, and it's really not making anything better because I've got just some craziness going on. So when I get to a point like that, then I think, okay, maybe I did something wrong. So then if I look at it and see the graph, it's very clear it's not monotonic, it fails the vertical line test, therefore there is no inverse.